He should really look at where the money went. They don't ever want to do that, because when you see where the money went and the scams, you don't even have to see.
And they want to keep migrant criminals in America.
The United States has long been a global leader in providing foreign aid.
He actually said we shouldn't be able to take criminals, killers, murderers, horrible, the worst people, gang members, gang leaders, that we shouldn't be allowed to take them out of our country.
But a growing chorus of concerned citizens are demanding an end to what they call the free ride for nations and individuals who openly disdain America.
It's a presidential job. That's not for a local judge to be making that determination. I think at a certain point you have to start looking at what do you do when you have a rogue judge.
Many argue that the U.S. has become a pinless ATM for the world, with taxpayer dollars being sent to countries and entities that often harbor hostility toward American values and interests.
I didn't hear a peep from judges when we were spending billions on U.S. aid, when we were spending billions of waste, fraud, and abuse that DOJ is trying to fix, when we were opening up the borders and letting all the illegal immigrants, criminals into the border. But now I'm hearing from the judges when we're trying to reverse the problem.
The sentiment is clear. The era of unconditional charity must end.
We don't have a fourth branch of government called Elon Musk. And
I knew we were going to get big legal battles with all this, Jackie, but I feel like these injunctions you're seeing, right? Temporary or nationwide or whatever it feels like it's just run amok at this point. Do you agree?
Critics warn that when charity becomes compulsory, gratitude turns into entitlement, and kindness is exploited like a doormat.
Who gets to make policy in America constitutionally? Is it Congress and the executive, or is it the judicial branch?
The left's dark money network has deep ties to USAID, which has rightly received renewed scrutiny under DOJ and after Elon Musk shined a light on it. The Soros-founded nonprofit has a long history with USAID. In 2001, the Soros Foundation's network, which became Open Society, listed USAID among its donor partners.
President Trump's attempts to address fraud, abuse, waste, corruption, and kickbacks in aid programs have faced significant opposition, both domestically and internationally.
Woke elites have captured the enterprise of foreign aid.
Some suggest this pushback reflects a concerted effort to undermine America's strength and sovereignty. A victimhood mentality is being weaponized to extract sympathy and resources from American taxpayers.
It started right after Elon Musk called them out in early February for corruption and bad spending habits, because Marco decided at first to cut only a few contracts for the year that were worth over $10 billion. Over 80% of the agency's programs weren't helping the United States.
Personal issues are prioritized and framed as moral aid obligation that both domestic and foreign are able to exploit for their own gain. This dynamic transforms well-intentioned help into hypocrisy, exploitation, lies, and predatory behavior. The analogy is stark. If you have to pay a friend to be your friend, they were never your friend to begin with.
The latest accusations against Hillary Clinton has been heavily involved in USAID's activities for a long time. Most of the money used under her watch was directed to the pockets of political allies and wealthy helpers.
As society drifts further from truth, those who speak it often face hostility and silencing. The level of incompetence and immaturity in global leadership is staggering. Many nations act like irresponsible dependents, expecting the U.S. to cover their debts and pay their bills while refusing to stand on their own 2 feet. Meanwhile, foreign aid rarely reaches its intended recipients. Instead, it is siphoned off by corrupt officials, contractors, and administrators who benefit disproportionately.
Instead of the poor communities they were meant for, those in charge of the money seem to be the ones who benefited the most.
However, when aid is cut off, these entitled grifters often resort to attacks, lawfare, and divisive tactics to halt progress and maintain their grip on power. At home, Trump's America First agenda continues to resonate with the working class and those frustrated by multiple levels of bureaucracy and decades of U.S. resources being diverted abroad. His efforts to cut inefficiency, get rid of the bloating, and prioritize American interests have been met with fierce resistance, including accusations of persecution against immigrations, with comparisons to authoritarian regimes. Common-sense border security measures are often mischaracterized as Hitler-style roundups, despite the fact that undocumented immigrants have the right and privilege to return to their home countries of their own free will. The real issue is not persecution, but the exploitation of sympathy to advance agendas that harm American interests. As the world grapples with distorted realities and entrenched power structures resistant to change, the debate over foreign aid and America's role on the global stage remains as contentious as ever. America First, under Trump's effort to combat what can be called FAWCK, fraud, abuse, waste, corruption, kickbacks, faces oppositions and growing frustrations over establishing efficient systems and mechanism of productivity and accountability.
And I'd like to start by saying that our country is doing very well. Things are, as you can see, doing quite well. Please sit down. Today we take a very historic action that was 45 years in the making. In a few moments, I will sign an executive order to begin eliminating the Federal Department of Education once and for all. The department, we're going to shut it down and shut it down as quickly as possible. It's doing us no good. We want to return our students to the states.
Many redundant and useless department as well as unaccountable bureaucratic bloats that lower standards and prioritize inclusivity, along with flavors of diversity and equity, over meritocracy that consume billions of taxpayer reserves without any tangible result except bogging down efficiency with layers of bureaucracy that complicate processes and undermine competence are being eradicated. There are concern that efforts to create an egalitarian system of cooperation and mutual benefit often come at the expense of meritocracy. Standards are lowered, critical issues are overlooked, and problematic practices are not only permitted but eventually legalized and even celebrated. Those who dare to stand against these trends can find themselves being canceled, accused, or even prosecuted. There is an inversion of justice, where rule breakers became rule makers, creates a challenging environment for accountability. It takes immense courage to challenge the status quo, root out corruption, and address inefficiency and violations. Critics argue that retribution is necessary to restore integrity and ensure that taxpayer dollars are used effectively. Critical questions are raised about the role of government in maintaining high standards of competence and accountability in serving the public good.
Because there were two conceits that our leadership class had when it came to globalization. The first is assuming that we can separate the making of things from the design of things. The idea of globalization was that rich countries would move further up the value chain while the poor countries made the simpler things. You would open an iPhone box and it would say designed in Cupertino, California. Now the implication, of course, is that it would be manufactured in Shenzhen or somewhere else. And yeah, some people might lose their jobs in manufacturing, but they could learn to design, or to use a very popular phrase, learn to code. But I think we got it wrong. It turns out that the geographies that do the manufacturing get awfully good at the designing of things. There are network effects, as you all well understand. The firms that design products work with firms that manufacture. They share intellectual property, they share best practices, and they even sometimes share critical employees. Now, we assume that other nations would always trail us in the value chain, but it turns out that as they got better at the low end of the value chain, they also started catching up on the higher end. We were squeezed from both ends. I'd say that globalization's hunger for cheap labor is a problem precisely because it's been bad for innovation.
You've been given the choice between war and dishonor. You've told Trump to leave us alone. One of your GNU ministers stood here and gave him the finger. Now we are alone. Scapegoating, though convenient, doesn't hold any water. Who granted them SA envoy status to go cap in hand to canvass for the protection of minority rights in the USA? Something that never existed for majorities before 1996.
Cheap labor is fundamentally a crutch, and it's a crutch that inhibits innovation. I might even say that it's a drug that too many American firms got addicted to. Now, if you can make a product more cheaply, it's far too easy to do that rather than to innovate. And whether we were offshoring factories to cheap labor economies or importing cheap labor through our immigration system, cheap labor became the drug of Western economies. And I'd say that if you look in nearly every country from Canada to the UK that imported large amounts of cheap labor, you've seen productivity stagnate. I don't think that's not a total happenstance. I think that the connection is very direct.
The only thing that socialism produces is poverty. We have become so dependent on foreign aid from wherever we can get it that the termination of US aid and PEPFAR will have deadly consequences. You couldn't balance your budget 2 weeks ago, and now you've got an additional 8.7 billion rand for HIV AIDS program shortfall, because they've been beating a path to the Oval Office, and they aren't interested in our self-inflicted wounds. They will only compound our economic travails and poverty. Argentina faced 100 years of systematic economic failure as a result of taking weak stances on major global conflicts and as a result of having closed ourselves off to trade. We lost practically all international significance. Argentina has been infected by socialism for too long, and that it would once again embrace the ideals of freedom, defense of life, liberty, and private property.
The solution, I believe, is American innovation.